The Scouting Party. The Threnic Dominion had never lost a war. In 300 years of expansion, they had conquered 217 worlds, and not once had a single campaign ended in retreat. Their armies were disciplined. Their ships were silent. Their commanders were patient, calculating, and utterly without mercy. High Marshal Corvex Thal had personally overseen 40 of those conquests, and he intended for Earth to become the 218th. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vorinth, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the view screen. Corvex was tall even by Threnic standards, with pale gray skin and eyes the color of dull silver. He had a reputation across the Dominion for being unshakable, a commander who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Fear did the talking for him. Sensors confirmed the target region, said his second-in-command, a sharp and ambitious officer named Sava Bren. She was younger than most lieutenants who reached her rank, having earned it through 3 successful campaigns and an almost frightening attention to detail. The continent's eastern and western population centers show heavy military and government concentration. But this region here, she gestured to a glowing marker on the map, shows something different. Massive crowd gatherings. Elevated adrenaline signatures across thousands of individuals. Competitive behavioral patterns. Possible training grounds. Corvex studied the readout. The location was a small town called Millhaven, somewhere in a region of the continent called Texas. The scans showed exactly what Sava described, clusters of humans gathering in open fields, shouting, competing, displaying what the Dominion's instruments registered as aggressive posturing behavior at levels far beyond anything recorded in their other scouting reports from Earth. "This is no ordinary town," Corvex said slowly. "This is a proving ground. A place where they train their fiercest warriors before sending them to defend the cities." He had seen this pattern before, on a jungle world called Ferrith, where the toughest fighters were bred in remote tribal regions before being absorbed into the Central Army. It made tactical sense to him. Conquer the source of their strength first, and the rest of the continent would fall without a fight. "Send a scouting team," he ordered. "I want eyes on the ground before we commit the invasion fleet. Find their training methods. Find their leadership. And find their weaknesses." Sava Bren volunteered to lead the team herself. She assembled 6 of her best soldiers, disciplined, calm under pressure, and trained in the Dominion's advanced infiltration techniques. Among them was a quiet, towering soldier named Dren Holt, who had never once smiled during a deployment, and a smaller, restless trooper named Ixvarn, who had a habit of asking questions that made his superiors uncomfortable. The team's human disguise generators activated as their shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere under full cloak. When they stepped out near a tree line just beyond the edge of Millhaven, their forms had shifted entirely. Sava became a woman in jeans and a denim jacket, her silver eyes now a convincing shade of brown. Dren Holt became a broad-shouldered man in a flannel shirt, looking exactly like he belonged at a hardware store counter. Ixvarn became a teenager in a baseball cap, which he found deeply undignified and said so, repeatedly, until Sava told him to be quiet. They moved through the woods in tight formation, scanners active, weapons disguised as ordinary objects, a tablet, a water bottle, a set of car keys. The noise reached them before the fairgrounds came into view. A rolling wave of music, shouting, laughter, and something that sounded disturbingly like an explosion followed immediately by cheering. Sava raised a hand, and the team froze at the tree line. Below them, spread across a wide dusty field, was Millhaven's annual county fair. Strings of lights crisscrossed between poles. A Ferris wheel turned slowly against the darkening sky. Dozens of tents and stalls lined the perimeter, and at the center of it all, a massive crowd had gathered around something the team's scanners could not immediately identify. "Movement patterns are completely irregular," Dren Holt reported, his voice flat and steady as always. "No formation. No chain of command visible. But adrenaline and cortisol readings are extremely high across the entire crowd." "There," Sava said, pointing toward a roped-off dirt arena where a group of old, battered cars sat in a rough circle, engines roaring. A man with a megaphone shouted something the translator struggled to render cleanly, something about, "Last car standing wins the trophy." The cars lurched forward and slammed into each other with tremendous force, metal crunching, the crowd roaring its approval. "Combat trials," Sava whispered. "They are testing vehicle warfare. Untrained civilians, driving armored units into direct collision, while the crowd evaluates their performance." Varn squinted at the scene. "Sir, with respect, that does not look like training. That looks like the vehicles are designed to be destroyed on purpose." "Then it's worse than we thought," Sava said. "They've made destruction itself into a spectacle. A society that celebrates loss of equipment without flinching is a society with unlimited resources, or unlimited resolve. Possibly both." She led the team along the edge of the fairground, scanners recording everything. They passed a long row of tents where humans stood over enormous simmering pots, stirring dark red mixtures and occasionally tasting them with visible looks of intense concentration. A handwritten sign above the largest tent read "Annual Chili Cook-O FF, judging at 7 p.m., cash prize." "Chemical preparation stations," Dren Holt noted. "Possibly developing some kind of biological agent. The compounds being mixed show extreme heat signatures and strong chemical reactivity in the air." "It's some kind of weapon," Sava agreed, watching a heavy-set man in an apron taste a spoonful of his concoction, go bright red in the face, fan his mouth rapidly, and then grin and give an enthusiastic thumbs up to a judge walking past. "And whatever it does to the body, they consider a successful result to be pain, followed by approval." It was at this moment that the team encountered their first direct human contact, and it did not go according to any infiltration protocol Sava had ever trained for. A short, silver-haired woman in an apron stained with flowers stepped directly into their path, carrying a tray of something steaming. She looked at the four of them, disguised as 2 adults and 2 teenagers, standing stiffly at the edge of the chilly tent like they had never seen a fairground in their lives, and immediately narrowed her eyes with the particular suspicion of someone who had run a diner for 40 years and could spot an outsider from across a parking lot. "You all look lost," she said. "Y'all new in town?" Sava's translator processed the question and offered no clean tactical response. "We are evaluating the area," she said carefully. The woman, whose name tag read DOT, studied them a moment longer, then apparently decided that strange behavior was simply a personality trait and not a threat. "Well, you can't evaluate anything on an empty stomach. Here." She thrust the tray toward them, holding out 4 small cups of something thick, dark red, and steaming gently in the night air. "First samples always free. Tell me what you think and don't lie to me, I'll know." Varn, against every protocol drilled into him since training, accepted the cup and drank it before Sava could stop him. What happened next would later be reported back to High Marshal Korvac Sthal as an unidentified chemical event causing immediate and severe distress to a member of the scouting team, but what actually happened was that Varn's eyes went wide, his face turned a shade of red that did not exist anywhere in the Threnic color spectrum, and he made a sound that the universal translator was completely unequipped to interpret. Dot watched this with the calm satisfaction of a woman who had just won a bet with herself. "Too much for you, sweetheart," she said, grinning. "That's just a 3 out of 10 on the spice scale. Wait till you try Hank's batch over there, that one'll put hair on your chest." Sava grabbed Iggs by the arm and pulled the team back from the tent, scanning frantically for signs of permanent damage. There were none. Within 90 seconds, Iggs was breathing normally again, though he remained deeply shaken and refused to look directly at the chilly tent for the rest of the operation. "Command," Sava said quietly into her communicator, her voice noticeably less steady than it had been an hour earlier, "this is not a training ground. This is something else entirely. These humans willingly subject themselves to chemical pain as a form of competition. They destroy their own vehicles for entertainment. Their leadership structure is invisible, possibly non-existent, and yet thousands of them gather here without panic, without hierarchy, and without fear. There was a long pause before Korvax Thal's voice returned, calm as ever. "Understood, Lieutenant. This confirms my theory. This is where they forged their strongest. Continue observation. The invasion fleet begins descent within the hour." Sava looked back over her shoulder at the fairgrounds, at the laughing crowds, the demolished cars, the smell of fried food and wood smoke drifting through the warm night air, and at Iggs Varn, still pale and trembling from a cup of chili rated a mere 3 out of 10 on a scale she did not yet understand. For the first time in her career, Lieutenant Sava Bren did not feel prepared for what came next. And she had absolutely no idea how right she was. The worst 3 hours in galactic history. The invasion fleet descended over Millhaven at exactly 9:47 p.m., cutting through the night sky in a formation that had broken the will of 17 separate civilizations without a single shot fired. High Marshal Korvax Thal stood at the front of the lead transport, watching the fairground lights grow closer through the viewport, already composing in his mind the speech he would give once the surrender was complete. He had given variations of that speech 217 times before. He did not expect this one to be any different. He was wrong within the first 4 minutes. The transports landed in the open field just beyond the fairgrounds parking lot, exactly as planned, in perfect tactical formation, exactly as planned. What was not as planned was the reaction of the crowd. Korvax had expected screaming. He had expected scattering, panic, the chaotic stampede of an unprepared population realizing too late that resistance was futile. Instead, several hundred fairgoers turned toward the massive descending ships, pointed their phones upward, and began cheering. "Is this part of the fireworks show?" someone shouted from near the Ferris wheel. "Dang, the fair committee really outdid themselves this year." Korvax stared at the readout from his external microphones, certain there had been a translation error. There had not been a translation error. The humans were, in fact, applauding. He ordered the first wave of soldiers to disembark and establish a perimeter. 40 Threnic warriors in full combat armor marched out of the transport doors in tight formation, weapons raised, prepared to demonstrate overwhelming force to a terrified populace. Instead, they marched directly into the middle of the demolition derby arena, where the crowd had been waiting eagerly for the next heat to begin. "Oh hell yes, new entries," bellowed the man with the megaphone. "Folks, looks like we got ourselves some last-minute competitors in full gear, give it up for these guys." The crowd roared its approval. Before the soldiers could process what was happening, 3 battered pickup trucks came screaming across the dirt arena and slammed directly into their formation, scattering Threnic warriors like bowling pins. This was, technically, exactly what was supposed to happen in a demolition derby. It was not, in any way, what Korvax Thal's soldiers had trained for. Half of them ended up flat on their backs in the dirt, completely unharmed thanks to their armor, but utterly stunned by an attack that hadn't even been aimed at them specifically. "Sir," came a frantic voice over the command channel, "the ground forces are requesting clarification. They are being struck by unidentified armored vehicles operating under no apparent command structure. Request immediate." The transmission cut off into static, then resumed a moment later with a tone of complete confusion. "Sir, belay that, several soldiers are now being asked to sign autographs." Korvax Thal descended from the transport himself, deciding that a problem this strange required his personal attention. He marched across the fairground with the same iron composure that had ended rebellions on a dozen worlds, prepared to locate the human commander and demand an unconditional surrender. Instead, he found Dot. She was standing exactly where Lieutenant Sava Bren had left her an hour earlier, still serving chili, completely unbothered by the enormous alien warships parked in the field behind her. She looked Korvax up and down, 7 feet tall, gray-skinned, armored in something that looked like polished obsidian, radiating the quiet menace of a being who had ended civilizations, and she handed him a sample cup. "You're a big fella," she said. "First one's free. Don't be shy." Korvax looked at the cup. He looked at the woman. He looked around at the fairground, where his soldiers were now scattered among the crowd, several of them sitting on the edge of the demolition derby arena while small children admired their armor, one of them being taught how to play a carnival game involving rings and bottles, and at least two of them, he would later identify them as troopers Vel and Korsk, accepting hot dogs from a vendor with visible enthusiasm. "I am High Marshal Korvex Thal of the Threnic Dominion," he announced, his voice booming across the fairground with the full weight of 217 conquered worlds behind it. "I have come to claim this world in the name of the Dominion. Surrender now, and your people will be spared." Dot considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Sure, Han, you gonna try the chili or not? Judging's in 20 minutes and I need everybody's honest opinion." It was, Korvex would later reflect, the single most disorienting moment of his entire military career. He had stood before kings who wept and begged. He had watched entire armies lay down their weapons rather than face him in battle. No one, in 300 years of Threnic conquest, had ever simply offered him a snack. Against every instinct he possessed, and entirely against his better judgment, Korvex Thal drank the chili. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. His eyes streamed. His throat, which had withstood the toxic atmosphere of a dying moon during the siege of Karnath Prime, felt like it had been set on fire from the inside. He made a noise that the gathered crowd found absolutely delightful, and within seconds a small audience had formed around him, phones raised, laughing and cheering him on. "That's a solid reaction," someone shouted. "Give that man a bottle of water, he earned it." "First time trying Texas chili, big guy?" Dot asked, grinning. "That's Hank's batch, the one I warned your friend about earlier. You handled it better than he did, I'll give you that." Korvex Thal, High Marshal of the Threnic Dominion, conqueror of 217 worlds, stood in the middle of a Texas county fair with tears streaming down his face from spice rather than sorrow, surrounded by cheering strangers who thought he was simply a very large, very enthusiastic fair attendee. For the first time since taking command, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. It only got worse from there. Over the next 2 hours, the invasion of Earth unraveled with a speed and thoroughness that would be studied in Dominion military academies for the next century, always as a cautionary tale, never as anything else. The volunteer fire department, responding to reports of some kind of overheating machinery near the demolition derby, arrived and hosed down a cluster of Threnic soldiers who had been standing too close to a barbecue pit, leaving them drenched, confused, and, according to several later reports, somewhat relieved, since Threnic armor ran uncomfortably hot in Texas humidity. Lieutenant Sava Bren, attempting to regroup her scattered scouting team, found Trooper Iggs Varn sitting at a picnic table with 3 local teenagers, eating a corn dog and animatedly describing, in halting and overly literal translated English, what it was like to grow up on a moon with 17 hours of darkness a day. The teenagers thought he was either an exchange student or extremely high, and either way found him fascinating company. Dren Holt, the soldier who had never once smiled during a deployment, was discovered by Sava sitting cross-legged near a stage where a local band played country music, having apparently been handed a guitar by someone who insisted everybody's gotta try once, and was now attempting, badly but with great enthusiasm, to learn 3 chords. "Soldier," Sava said, staring at him in disbelief. "We are in the middle of an active invasion." Dren Holt looked up at her, an expression on his face that she had genuinely never seen before. "Lieutenant," he said slowly, "I don't think anyone here knows that." By the time Korvex Thal recovered enough to address his command staff, the situation had moved entirely beyond his control. 40 soldiers were unaccounted for, scattered across the fairground in various states of integration into local festivities. 3 had reportedly requested asylum after discovering something called funnel cake. 1 had won second place in a pie-eating contest he had wandered into by accident and seemed prouder of that achievement than any battle commendation in his career. The chili cook-off judging had somehow proceeded on schedule, with Korvex Thal himself receiving an honorable mention for most enthusiastic reaction, non-local category. "Sir," Sava Bren said, finding her commander standing alone near the Ferris wheel, holding a half-finished funnel cake he did not remember accepting. "Orders, sir. Should we begin the secondary assault?" Corvex Thal stared out at the fairground. The lights. The laughter. The complete and total absence of fear in every human face he could see. Somewhere behind him, Trooper Vel was teaching a group of children how Threnic soldiers salute, to great delight. Somewhere to his left, Dot was loading the last of the chili pots back into her truck, having apparently decided the invasion was simply an unusual but not unwelcome addition to the evening's entertainment. "Lieutenant," Corvex said quietly, "in 300 years, the Dominion has never once retreated." "Yes, sir. I would like to retreat now." The order went out within the hour. The invasion fleet, having achieved nothing beyond several minor burns, one second-place pie-eating finish, and 40 soldiers who now had to be physically and emotionally extracted from a Texas county fair, lifted off into the night sky and did not look back. Dot watched the ships disappear over the horizon, untroubled, already planning next year's chili lineup. Somewhere in the vast records of the Threnic Dominion, a new entry would be added to the galactic star charts beside the small blue planet called Earth. "Do not engage, hospitality hazard. See Commander Corvex Thal's full report for details. If he ever stops refusing to discuss it." And somewhere on a moon 17 hours dark, Trooper Iggs Varn would spend the rest of his life telling anyone who would listen about the time he tried Texas chili and lived to regret it, fondly.